Can you pick something real quick to post on the Instagram so that
to post on there?
Yeah, to say that we're going live. Can you pick something real quick? Sorry. I'm going to change the bio right now. There we go. Copy.
Should we just repost the episode 2 thing and say live link out now in bio?
Yes. Done.
Yo, Kavehi, do you want to do question number 1 and then I'll do 2 and then just keep switching back and forth?
I'll do odds. You can do evens.
All right. Did you want me to post that or did you want to post it?
I reposted our post on my story and just said link is live and I tagged you.
All right.
Okay. I think so. We'll start in 1 minute.
All right.
You sound tired, dude.
Yeah.
You're like, don't even talk about it. Oh, hold on. Come on. Let's get it started.
What's up, everybody? This is Setting the Tone, episode 2 for Father's Day. My name is Slam.
And my name's Kavehi.
We got our fathers to come and share their perspective on everything happening. We thought it was important to have the pillars in our Black communities come and share their thoughts. So I have my dad right next to me, Spencer Dunkley.
How you doing, everybody? Spencer Dunkley.
Let's start video. We have my granddad. I'm just currently unmuting and bringing everyone back onto the screen. We have my granddad, Bob. I don't know, it's loading. We have my Uncle Raymond, and then one of my friend's dads, Tony. And so this is the lovely panel of fathers that we have set up today. So again, we just wanted to reiterate the purpose of this was to create like a safe and constructive space talk about like everything that's going on. And like Sam said, we thought it was important to bring like the pillars of our community together, especially in light of Father's Day coming up tomorrow. So happy Father's Day to all of you. And
Thank you.
thank you for bringing everyone into this world and what you did. So we wanted to let everyone introduce themselves. And we're going to start off with Robert.
Okay. My name is Bob Perry. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. I grew up there in the 50s in a strong Black middle class family and community. We were in some ways lucky in Durham. We had North Carolina College there, a state-funded college for African Americans. We also had the Mutual Savings and Loan, Mechanics and Farmers Bank, the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. Yes.
The video, it cut out. I'm asking.
Okay, I got a power problem here. I'm going to correct this.
Wait, oh, we can see you. Granddad.
Yes.
What are you doing? We can see your screen now.
Okay. Okay, now I'm back.
Yes, you're live.
Okay. Okay. No, I suppose I was fairly lucky in Durham, a very middle class community. I went to a Black Episcopal church. However, during the time I was an acolyte there, for 4 or 5 of the years, we had white priests, Episcopal priests from Duke University. That was my primary interaction with white people as a child. My high school was completely Black. It was the year, my senior year was the integration of public schools in Durham, and that meant that African American kids went to white schools. After white school kids didn't come to Black schools until 5 or 10 years later, after I graduated. I was fortunate in terms of I was very active in the Boy Scouts, became an Eagle Scout, and while in the Scouts, attended the Jamboree in Pikes Peak, Colorado, which involved a bus trip across the United States, the southern part of the United States, in 1960. We stayed on military bases because our scoutmasters were veterans, and that was the only place we could stay in most stops we made going across Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas. Then 2 years later, I had another trip across the country with my family. My father worked for North Carolina Mutual. There was a insurance convention in LA. So again, we took a car trip across the South, went to LA, then for the convention, up to San Francisco, Seattle, and then coming back across the US. So by the time I graduated from high school, I think I had been in probably 40 of the 50 states. And so that created an interest on my part of wanting to travel and see the world. In my high school, again, sort of time setting, 2 of my high school classmates were among the first African-American undergraduates at Duke University in 1963. I instead went to Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio, where I was one of 2 African-American students in my freshman class and in my senior class. The other person was different in each case. I would imagine there were 500 or so students total in each class, to give you some idea of difference. So I went from an all Black experience from the age of 3 to 17, and then a overwhelmingly white experience during my college years. If I had anything to do differently, I think I would have gone to an HBCU. Not so much because of the education issues, but because of the connections that you make in college and those that carry over. For me, there was very little carryover in terms of college to my professional life. I joined the Foreign Service with a fellowship. I got in and then started off on a 30-year career there. So, in a predominantly white institution, and probably one of the oldest cabinet departments, and certainly one that thinks most highly of itself, and where there's a culture of white is right. Yeah. So that's sort of shaped me over time. I'll stop here.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you. We're glad to have you here. I'm gonna have my dad introduce himself.
Well, my introduction might not be as in depth. Well, my name is Spencer Dunkley. I grew up in Wolverhampton, England, and I came here on a scholarship to play basketball at the University of Delaware. I'm 6'11" tall.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's where Slam gets his height from. You know, I grew up in a predominantly white England. It was a predominantly, all my friends were white. And when I came to the University of Delaware, it was, mostly mixed. It was black, but it was segregated. I never really saw segregation until I came to the United States. I remember when I was in the cafeteria, when I first came here at Newark High School, and I remember getting my lunch and turning around and seeing, for the first time, a segregated lunchroom. And it was white on one side, it was black on the other. And that was the first time I saw it. You know, in England, it was more of a mixed society. So that was my first introduction to, as you say, American racism. And so it was an eye opener. And move on to the next person.
All right. Tony, introduce yourself, Tony. Thank you.
I didn't hear. Am I up?
Yes, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Walters. I am from Wheatley Heights, Long Island, New York. I grew up, Long Island is known as one of the most segregated areas in the country, still is in 2020. I grew up in the town of Amityville, the same place where you get Amityville Horror from. Our high school was basically across the street from the house. True story, by the way. I am currently a teacher. I teach 5th grade. I've been a teacher now for 22 years. I'm also the head wrestling coach at St. Anthony's High School for the past 25 years. I am a graduate of West Virginia University, where I went to school to study engineering. I wrestled at West Virginia University, which gave a lot of my current experience with the undertones that you're seeing today has happened through the sport of wrestling. I was on the Olympic ladder trying to make the Olympic team after college. I have done numerous things, traveled over numerous places where my experiences have been different depending on where I go. New York happened to be, when you're growing up on Long Island in the 70s and the 80s, it was a very challenging time because racism was alive and well, as it still is today. I did my undergraduate at West Virginia University. My graduate degrees are from Adelphi University right here on Long Island. I have a degree in special education and one in elementary education. So it's been quite the experience going through all of those and getting the background to even be on this today. As I said, my experiences from dealing with it have been through sport, through my job, and just as an everyday person walking around. So that's pretty much where we are right now with my info.
Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm up now. So my name is Raymond Moore. I live in Long Beach, California. I've been out here for I think about 10 years now. Actually grew up mostly in Maryland, in Annapolis, Maryland, in a middle class community that was really predominantly white. went to high school there, stayed in Maryland for college, went to University of Maryland College Park, which was a great experience. It was really a big school that was very diverse, had a kind of everybody was there, almost 25,000 undergraduate students. So this is my first experience of really meeting people from lots of different backgrounds. Annapolis, Maryland, where I grew up, was somewhat segregated. It was middle class. There was a lot of different people there, but certainly the communities did sort of self-segregate in a lot of ways based just on sort of the history of the social structure there. So college was really the experience of having everybody in one place and people really trying to integrate and trying to get to be around other people. From there, I moved down to Atlanta for medical school, went to Emory University. And that was a great experience because Atlanta is a very different city than a lot of the cities in the Northeast, and that it has a really vibrant middle class, upper class, just a really a broader spectrum of an African American community and a very large African American community in Atlanta, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to go there. And I'd heard a lot about Atlanta from my parents who grew up in the South. And so that was what drew me there. From Atlanta, I then moved to Chicago, spent a few years there as a resident in pediatric medicine. Another great city, but again, a different large city. Chicago has everybody there, but it again is a pretty segregated city. Most of the Black community is on the south side, a lot of the Latino community on the west side, and the predominantly white community mostly on the north side. And that was a pretty stark thing to learn and to see when I moved there. I wasn't expecting that because it was really a metropolitan place, and I thought it would be a little bit more integrated. But still, it was interesting because everybody was there. After spending 3 years in Chicago, I moved out to Los Angeles and have been here in this, again, a very different city, really diverse, but in different ways than a lot of the cities on the East Coast. So it's been a really interesting experience being out here. Seeing how race and ethnicity and all the things that are involved in social structure sort of play out on the West Coast, which is pretty different than the East Coast. So like I said, been out here for about 10 years. I work as a pediatrician for one of the public health centers out here. Yeah, so my intro.
Thank you guys. I learned some new things I had not known. So the first question I wanted to start off with to segue into the next topic was, what is your perspective on everything that's going on right now? So like everyone had introduced themselves and like everyone was from different parts and different ages. So like everyone kind of has had different experiences, but what do you guys like, how are you feeling? And then I guess to make things easier, if like you guys want to like raise your hand too. Okay.
Yeah, so with the whole thing that's going on right now, for me, it's been really interesting. And I've been doing a lot of stuff on Facebook, talking to people from England and to people that I know in the US. And it's just crazy, the racial tension. Every person's post is really is racial. It's something about race. It's white people telling you that slavery didn't exist, or it's a whole bunch of tension right now. But I feel like the young people, you guys, like Dave Chappelle said, y'all driving the car and we on the back seat. So it's just really interesting. It's really interesting because it's not really like my generation or pop. It's not your generation. It's the new generation, and they just doing things a little bit different than we did things, and they getting a lot of results. I mean, all the civil rights movements, what we had in the '60s, the '70s and the '80s were kind of cruise control, but this movement that happened today in this 2020. I mean, they get major results, and it's amazing to see it. We've been so passive for so long, and now all of a sudden, everybody is verbalizing how they feel. It's like white people are shocked because we're telling people how we feel. This is how I feel. This is how I feel about you. This is how I feel about how you've treated me, and they're shocked, and they're not used to it. It's like they're not used to Black people verbalizing how they feel about racism. So it's for me, it's just it's been an interesting time period. And of course, like I said, I've been talking to people across the Atlantic, so I've been getting their perspective, and I've also been getting the American perspective. And the craziest thing for me was when they talk about tearing down the statues. Until they mentioned Winston Churchill in England, everything was cool. But as soon as they mentioned Winston Churchill, he's the pride of England. He defeated the Nazis and all the rest of it. But he's also, as we know, is a racist. He killed 3 million Indians in India. And so as soon as they mentioned Winston Churchill, that was it. The gloves went off, and it was just a whole different ball. It's been interesting. It's been really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll speak on that. I have to tell you that it took a little bit more of a personal tone with me, everything that's going on, because the morning of the video of George Floyd, you know, I found myself watching the news, and a few minutes later, I found myself in tears. And when you look at what happened, and you think to yourself, you know, I was one step away personally from where he was. The only difference was when you have a gun to the back of your head and someone's standing on your back and you hear a click, it gives you a whole new perspective on life, especially as a 12-year-old boy. So the way I feel about it now, I deal with a lot of police officers. My sister is a police officer. I coach kids whose parents, kids who become police officers. I don't have any animosity towards them because I have a lot of friends, a lot of people around me that are in police service. But to have experienced it firsthand on a number of occasions, and to the extreme of what you see happening in today's world, it brings light to dealing with some of my I don't necessarily call them friends. I call them associates. And when I'm dealing with them, you know, I had experience where people reached out to me and they wanted to know, you know, Tony, are you okay? Where to me, I was a little bit shocked because it came from people who you wouldn't think they would ask you directly. And I had a lot of people reaching out, trying to get information, trying to find out, you know, what can we do? I had some conversations with a couple of my former athletes, and some were on the extreme, oh, you know, this doesn't happen. Others were on the, well, you know, educate me. And I feel a little indifferent on that because I feel at times like it's not my job to educate you. And I say that because I'm tired. You know, I've been fighting this fight. I coach in a predominantly white high school. I coach in a sport that is predominantly white in New York State. I work in a district that is predominantly Black and Hispanic. And I live in a district that's the most diverse on Long Island. So I'm getting it from different extremes. My experiences are different based on who I'm dealing with. And I just see, I'm happy for the fight that's happening out in the world today. I'm glad it's a worldwide cause now, but I still am around people that they just don't get it. They don't see it. They choose not to see it. And I don't have the patience to talk with people who, you know, they don't even want to have empathy for you. I don't need sympathy. I don't want sympathy. I want empathy. I need you to listen, to hear. And there's a lot of people that every time you start speaking, they want to chime in. They want to give their personal experience. They want to tell you why you're wrong. And I tend to just avoid people like that now. I'm not a violent person. But again, as I said, my own personal experience for it makes me feel a different way towards dealing with it.
Thank you.
For that.
Yeah, so I would say too, I mean, with all this, I think it's great. I mean, I've loved seeing all the passion. I love that the sort of the coalition, I guess, is broadening, and there's more people. There are people who hadn't spoken up before that are sort of, you know, leading, you know, some of the protests and the movement now. And I'm happy to see that. But one of the things that I keep questioning, even like to people that I see that I know that I've grown up with that are good people, but now they're starting to speak up. I'm sort of like, why now? Like, what happened? You know, I've known you for 40 years, 30 years. You never asked me before, you know, what my experience was like, or whether things were different for me than they were for them. I've been here the whole time. The experiences have been different for me, and now people are starting to want to know. And it was always pretty obvious. I mean, all of us, we knew we were living it, and we knew that things were different for us, and that there was still racism, either blatantly or subtly in society. Um, so it's nice to see that people are that want to address it, but I sort of like wonder, how did they not see it before? Why are they now interested in it, and will it last too? I mean, you know, again, I love to see it, um, and I love to see the momentum right now. But I do have to question, like, at what point does something else come along and sort of get the media attention and get other people's personal attention, and they sort of stop fighting, they stop putting posts on their page, they stop self-reflecting and publicly sort of saying that they're going to do things differently, and they just slip back into their old ways, not because they don't care, but because that's just easier. Um, and then what happens? We're still going to live the same lives we have to live. We'll still experience the same racism that's there, but we won't have as many people helping us to fight the fight.
Okay, you know, I suppose I could start off by saying that I accept that I am depressed, because I think I was depressed before I was willing to accept it. And it was a combination of two things: the COVID, we were locked in for 2 months or more, and then this on top of that. And during particularly the COVID, and even continuing to the dealing with the protests, the lack of leadership at the national level, I'm talking about at the White House, relative to the last 40 years, is depressing for me. I'm glad to see that governors and mayors have, in dealing and interacting with the protesters, have engaged and tried to understand them on dealing with COVID, tried to reach out, provide testing when they could, and help people, which I have not seen coming from the national level. And again, I compare this going back into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where I thought our presidential leadership was better dealing with a crisis. I got to the point that I sent a family email around to my nephew, Raymond's brother, living in Germany, asking how the Nazis were much worse than slavery. But it appears that they have been more engaged in trying to deal with it, to acknowledge the history and to say this was bad. Not complete, I'm talking about structural stuff top. On a personal level, the racism there. They did that in 2 generations. You've got the alt-right there, but they don't have the same prestige that establishment figures have in the US, cities, all levels, that put up the statues and have kept them up and supported them being up over the last decade when protests were beginning to come up. But establishment figures here, it was very slow, and in some cases, it didn't happen at all until the past week, people started tearing the statues down. Yesterday, they tore down the statue of Albert Pike, a Mason and slave supporter or defender. This was at the turn of the century of 1900s, who defended slavery and the segregation that followed. They finally tore it down. Our representative had been trying to get it removed over the past 2 years. That didn't work, working through the system. So when social organizations have tried to correct and remove the Confederate stigma, too many leaders just listened and ignored. Now people are taken to the streets to do the establishment people with responsibility to not refuse to do. Where the road ahead, I don't know. Like Raymond said, people are saying the right thing now, but will they continue to act and take the necessary steps for the next 5 years? We'll see.
Thank you. Bringing
Thank
everything
you.
in, Granddad.
Yeah, those are some really good answers. We're going to get into the next discussion topic, which is what is something that you experienced as a child up until now that you would hope that future Black children or future children of color will not have to experience?
So it's funny today, guys, that I was writing down, like I said, growing up in England, some of the derogatory names that people use to refer to Black people. And you walking down the street and someone would say something derogatory to you. And some of those names was Jungle Bunny, Monkey, of course the classic nigger, coon, Sambo, Gollywog. And in England, they used to have one called Chalky, where they refer to a Black man, they would call him Chalky. And I was thinking about that today, about all those names. And they said it's funny that no one ever referred to me as a gorilla. And I thought to myself, why did no one ever refer to me as a gorilla? And if you think about it, it's because a gorilla is a tough, strong beast. He'll rip your head off. If you look at a gorilla, he's a fearsome animal. And it's funny that with their racist names that they developed, a monkey is like an infantile creature that's funny, and it needs to be cuddled, and it's soft, and it don't have much sense. But no one ever called a Black man a gorilla, because like I said, it's a tough beast. You see the gorilla's teeth, and he's a big, strong, I'm 6'11". I'm a pretty imposing guy when I get angry. And nobody ever called me a gorilla. I just thought that was funny that the racist people, thought about these names that they would call us to make sure that there was nothing that would make us feel like we were strong and imposing. And so growing up in England, those are the kind of things that I had to deal with. And it was just funny. I was just brainstorming about that today. And like I said, I even looked at a few pictures of gorillas, and they are very imposing creatures. So I just thought it was interesting. And Slam, a couple of times, well, one time in particular, I think he was jogging through the city where we live now in Odessa, in Delaware, and a pickup truck drove by and called him a nigger. And I think it's in 2020 or 2018 when this happened. It's just crazy that this kind of stuff is still going on. But I think it's up to us as Black men, and especially you guys, the younger generation, to just keep on pushing and keep the pressure on to make sure that this stuff doesn't continue. There's always going to be racism. We're never going to put a stop to racism. It's never going to end. But I think that we just have to keep putting the pressure on to make sure that these things don't continue, that his kids don't have to deal with it as much as we do. Like Pop, I know your generation had to deal with it a lot more than my generation. I think I'm a little bit older than you two guys down there. So each generation has to deal with less racism. So we never going to get rid of it, but we're going to reduce the amount of racism that we have to deal with. So you just got to keep the pressure on and just keep on pushing. Like I said, right now in 2020, more things have happened in this last month than I've seen happen in 30 years. So, hey, like I said, we're on the back seat, the young people driving. Just keep on doing your thing, and let's hope this thing transfers into votes. Let's get this idiot out of the White House and get some normalcy back in this country.
That's a good answer.
I look at it, the thing that I would like to see change, and it's a constant conversation in our household, with my son and my two girls, is the talk. We all know the talk. And what bothers me is that I have to have that talk. I have to explain to my son, who to me is one of the most innocent people out there, he's oblivious to it. But I have to explain to him that you could be in the wrong place at the wrong time and you become the target. it's a scary feeling that you have to have if your kids, every time they leave the house, that could be the last time that you can see them. And that's something that I would love to see change. I would love to know that my kids, when they have their kids, don't have to have that conversation to stress it every time they walk through the door, to choose and do certain things because you don't want to put yourself in the bullseye in terms of going certain places or experiencing certain things. Those are the types of things that I look at, that I pray that the younger generation doesn't have to deal with, because it's a tough pill to swallow. And I have a number of friends that have had the same conversation, and unfortunately, through whatever incident that happened, you know, some of them, their kids are not back, and some of them are not back. So it's a challenge when you're dealing with today, and you know, we have a president who won't even acknowledge that this is real, that this happens. A president that's um, very precise in what comes out of his mouth in terms of promoting it and not stopping it, not even acknowledging that this is happening. And I always think back to, you know, the same time that the Amari, he was jogging and the video came out. There was a kid from Connecticut who killed 2 people. And I remember saying to my wife, I guarantee you he's going to be caught alive. These things happen where you have someone who killed 2 people. He traveled from Connecticut to Maryland. And when they found him, he had a loaded gun and no shots were fired. And when I think of that, I'm not wishing that shots were fired, but I'm saying, don't you see something is wrong when anytime it has to deal with a Black person, whether it's female or male, it's the extreme case. It's never the, okay, what's the word they use? De-escalate. I'm tired of hearing de-escalate. You can't de-escalate something when you've already come in with the intention of finishing it. So when you look at what's going on and you have those fears that people, you know, I have friends, again, I keep saying friends, associates who look at me like I'm crazy. I have colleagues, you know, in New York, I'm in a teaching system where I said it's predominantly Black and Hispanic students, and the teaching staff is predominantly white. So this is a very touchy subject for many of my colleagues. They don't even want to embrace it because they don't want to be uncomfortable. So I've learned, even as an athlete, that when you get comfortable, that's when they get you. And I teach this to my kids. I teach this to my athletes. You know, you can never be comfortable, because the minute you become comfortable is when you start thinking you're okay, and that's when you slip. So having to live that life and watch it go from generation to generation, I pray that this movement that's going on right now, it doesn't die off, as Raymond and Robert, you guys were saying earlier, that I've been saying this constantly. I said, so what happens 2 months from now when it's quiet? You know, you have people beating their chests now, and they're trumpeting it, and they're out there. But what happens 2 months from now when, you know, it's died down, everybody's either been arrested or whatever? What's the next step? And I agree with you that it is the youth that they have to be the front runners of this. They have to fight. They have to continue to fight. Again, you can't get comfortable, because getting comfortable, again, it'll slip right by. And going back to normal, that shouldn't be a normal for anyone. So that's the things that I look at, and it's a constant thought. You know, it's a constant conversation in our house, and it's just something that I would love to know that the generations coming don't have to deal with that.
I couldn't agree more with what you said about sort of, you know, the conversations that you have to have with your own kids, and the hope that they don't have to have the same conversation with their kids. I have a 4-year-old son, and didn't think that at 4 that I'd have to start having those conversations yet. And yet with all this now, it's sort of hard not to. And he sees it on TV and he's asking about police and are police good or are police bad and what are people doing out there. And so, you have to have the honest conversations. And, it's unfortunate that we have to. All of us got the talk. It's never just one talk, right? It's always, it's a lot of talks that come in. It's lots of situations where you have to have a conversation and sort of realize what's going on. But, I can only hope that sort of, the next generation, when my son, has children, that, he may not have to have the same conversations, or at least not the same level or same frequency or same intensity of those conversations, because hopefully the world's a little bit of a better place. And then sometimes I also worry about not just the overt racism, because, now everyone talks about microaggressions, which are basically, a lot of the backhanded compliments. Those are the things that we deal with now. And it's like, we know what you're saying. Like, you don't have to, call me a nigger to know, for me to know that that's what you're thinking about me when you say something. And those are sometimes just as bad, because those are the people that are smiling at you and telling you, or surprised that you're doing well at something. And I'm like, why are you surprised that I'm doing well and not the person standing next to me with a different skin color? So I hope that my son doesn't end up in situations, if he's successful at something, that no one's surprised that he's successful. He's successful because he worked hard, and he's just good, and he should be acknowledged for that. So yeah, it's the overt racism as well as the implicit and sort of subtle racism that I hope are better for the next generation.
Thank you. I'm gonna move on to the next question that we have for you guys. So, Uncle Raymond, you had kind of mentioned before and even Tony, you guys had mentioned before, where people have reached out to you, where you're just like, interesting. So with that, have you had friendships or relationships with people who were either racist or prejudiced themselves or complicit and silent towards racism? And how did you handle that?
Through coaching, I guess it goes back to something, Raymond, you were just talking about, where people don't look at the success. I coach at a predominantly white high school. We are very successful. Okay, we've traveled all over the country. We've gone to a few places outside of the country. We are a very successful wrestling program. And here in Long Island, New York, there are 2 counties. There's Suffolk County and Nassau County. They're usually the top 2 counties in the state. And I have been personally boycotted by both counties, where we are constantly on the road. And you're talking, there's 120 schools on Long Island, 120 school districts, like different high schools. And they have boycotted competing against me, to where we have to go out of state, just because it's that extra, because I'm a Black man, I have to push and train my kids twice as hard to get the same status that their kids have. And I deal with predominantly white kids. I have lost tons of acquaintances because I've just reached a point now where I'm done being the token. I'm always the guy, the level-headed guy that people want to get Tony. Tony will explain it. Tony will calm them down. I'm done being that guy. I'm done being the one who has to be rational in a situation where, as an adult, you should be rational. You should think and not have the blinders on, where your perspective is the only perspective. So I've cut people off, and I have a very low tolerance for that. You get one chance to rub me the wrong way. And once you've done that, I've moved on. It's something that I'm still dealing with. 2020, last year at the New York State tournament, I was escorted out of the arena by armed police, and I was protesting the injustice of what was going on. And it's been happening for 25 straight years of going to that tournament. So people that I've dealt with on my own team, where I am the only exposure to an African-American that their kids may ever have, because that's just not in their circle. It to me, when you get letters and you talk to the kids years later, and one of the talks I say to them is that you're fighting two issues. You're fighting having a black coach. Okay, so you got the referees are gonna take it out on you because they can't take it out on me. So how do they get to me? They attack you. So, and you also deal with, because it's a Catholic high school, you're dealing with that, which is a negative here in New York. So those types of things where I've dealt with people on my own team, where it's blatant. I said, when you come into my wrestling room, you leave your beliefs, your political beliefs outside the door. This is not the place for it. And we've had pro-Trump supporters where their parents are very in your face, they're nice, they're smiling, but then you turn your back and it's like they're the ones pushing 10 knives in your back and belittling you and talking negativity about you. So it's been where now when I hear people say it, I said, it's not my job to teach you. It's not my job to change your mind. If you're blind to what's happening in 2020, in the past month of May, if you are still blind to what is happening, then you're that person who I would say is next. You're the next person. And we all know what next means. So I'll leave it at that, but my experiences, I've cut off so many people to where my circle it's on one hand. And I'm okay with that. You know, it's 49 years of age. I've lived a lifetime of always being the guy to want to make things right so that my world is good. But if you're going to mess up my world, it's easy to cut you out.
And I'll say, it's been, I mentioned before, it's been a little frustrating to see people sort of coming around now. But, for people that, I feel that our friends, I'll say better late than never. And so, if it's just coming now, like let's start now and make up for lost time. I'd like to think that the friends that I have, I certainly don't think I would be friends with anybody if I knew they were racist. Were there people that were complicit with racism around us? Maybe, but I like to think well of people that I've been friends with and say that they just didn't realize it. They had never thought to ask. They didn't really look. People don't like to look places where they might be uncomfortable. And so I don't blame them for it necessarily. I just sort of say, okay, let's start now. I'm not going to be the teacher. I'm not going to go through the history and explain everything that's happening and everything that you've missed over the last, your whole life. But again, they're friends, and so I think the fact that they're willing to have a conversation now is better than not. I think the people that still refuse, like Tony was saying, people that still don't see it, those are the people that I think I would have a problem with. Fortunately, I haven't had any friends that I've been in close contact with that still seem like they're oblivious to it. I think this has opened their eyes, if nothing has in the past. So I think that's a good thing. But for those that continue to deny it, for anybody who just hasn't seen it in the last month, that would be someone that I think, deserves being cut off, and they need to.
You don't need that person.
Figure this out. The rest of the world is getting there.
Thank you. Granddad, I know you can't see everyone right now with your iPhone.
Well, yeah. Also, as someone who is semi-retired, I don't go to an office. I'm working with a group of consultants. Our group is predominantly African American, not exclusively, but predominantly. We're trying to help companies enter new markets. We have an Australian partner that we try to help him bring Australian companies here or to take them into Africa, where I manage the planning. I can be more choosy about who I associate with now that I could not do when I was an employee in the State Department. I had to work with certain people regardless of how they were. I don't have to do that anymore. And I choose not to associate with folks who don't respect me. So, but it's funny. I'm gonna give you an experience going back a number of years. When I was in Vietnam, I was on an advisory team, the civilian equivalent rank of a first or second lieutenant with 12 military. My best relationships were with the E7 sergeants, white, less so with the white lieutenants and captain, who saw me maybe as a, I don't know, a threat or somebody at their level, which they couldn't accept. The sergeants recognized my education and background and accepted me being in a leadership role with them. And I'm talking about sergeants from North Carolina, Kentucky, and the South. And point here, this was 1969, and your image of the South then was that there was no interaction. I think one of the worst, or one of the draft forced everyone to be together, no matter your ethnic or economic or social background. When that ended, then you found people in the top educational qualifications did not interact with working class people of any color. And then they get elected to be governor, senator, and they don't know what the problems are or how to understand the perspectives of people not on their level, which creates the type of problems we have now at the senior levels.
Thank you for that, guys. That was all awesome. The next question we want to talk about is a lot of the youth in the movement have been talking about systemic racism, and it's easy to find data and disparities to prove that there, is systemic racism. But how have you seen it in your own life, in Black communities, and as people working right now? How have you seen systemic racism in your own lives?
So since we're on the hot seat, I'm self-employed. I've been self-employed my whole life, and buy real estate in the city, in a lot of low-income neighborhoods. And I think the number one thing that I see with real estate, we had the issue of redlining, and everybody knows about redlining, and Black people being forced to live in these low-income neighborhoods. And I think that's a huge issue that has to be sorted out. I mean, the same houses I buy on the east side, which is Wilmington, which is predominantly Black. And if you go onto the north side, it's predominantly white. The same houses, the same bricks, but you have a disparity in the Black neighborhood. It's unfortunately nasty. There's trash everywhere. Of course, there's junkies. The houses are in disrepair, flaky paint, and a lot of violations. If you go to the white neighborhood, the exact same houses, it's clean. These houses are worth $300,000. On the east side, in the Black neighborhood, they worth $30,000, $40,000. So we have these issues with real estate and Black people being forced to live in these poor areas. I think that's one of the issues that we really have to try to fix. If we need to improve things, we have to we have to try to buy real estate to increase wealth and try to separate and get away from these ghettos, as they call them. It's infested with crime, and Black people, we got to get out of those neighborhoods. And we got to move away and try to do better. To keep having these people forced to live in these neighborhoods, it's killing our community.
I think I agree 100% with you. I think it's a mindset. And I have a program here called Living the Mentality. And it's something it's financial, it's emotional, it's physical. And it's just a path I took when I was training that, everything had to be right. And I always had a plan. And when you talk about wealth, if I walk across my street, I'm in what's called Dix Hills. And that's literally across the street. Across the street, the homes are millions of dollars. The taxes are in $20,000 a year. On my side of the street, which is Wheatley Heights, you're dealing with taxes that are still less than $10,000 in certain houses, but it's a professional neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that is very diverse. But when you go across the street, you're dealing with a predominantly white neighborhood. It does have some diversity in it, but there's a difference when it comes to the cost of the same house being across the street to the house that I'm living in. And I think that mindset is what keeps people, it's sort of like welfare. If someone's one generation doesn't break the cycle keeps continuing. I see so much of it in our mindset in terms of you look at education as a key to getting out. And I still feel that even today, I have my own personal opinions, like with terms of music and television and things of that nature, that still continue to promote that stereotype that we have. And I look at certain people who don't use their platform and their responsibility to try to change that and say, hey, listen, if I'm driving a nice car, it doesn't mean I'm a drug dealer or an athlete. It could mean that I just work hard and I want something nice. I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy it. That's what I did. It shouldn't be questioned or looked at as, well, how did you get that? And I think so many times we, as a culture, we don't look at buying property, investing, and things of that nature to gain wealth as a possibility, because we've always been told we are inferior. We're not smart enough. We're not guided towards that. I think wealth is something that I know, at least in my family, my dad's from Jamaica, my mom's from Trinidad. That's not something where they were brought to this country to look for wealth. They were brought to this country to work hard. They instilled it in us to work hard. And if you want something, you work hard for it. I don't see that in a lot of people that I grew up with. Everyone's branched off. Some have gone on to become successful in their own right. But you just see too much of it where we are not educated enough. We weren't instilled in us that this is an important factor, buying property and those things of those natures, owning your own business, things of things, and making them profitable to a point where you can then help the next person. So there's a lot of things when you're dealing with the mindset of people, and some people, they don't want to break that mindset. And I think it's something that you have to be willing to want to do. You have to want better. And if you have kids, you have to want better. And it has to be a way of life.
I think a lot of that mindset that that you're referring to is coming from the fact that the communities that a lot of African Americans are in don't have the resources. So the mindset is because of sort of what they're experiencing day to day, and that a lot of those experiences are because of the racism that Slam was, I think, talking about. The racism that leads to the fact that schools are different based on your socioeconomic status, and oftentimes because of your race and your ethnicity. If you don't have a good school, you're not going to have other good opportunities. You're not going to be able to get a good job, and that mindset's going to be self-fulfilling because you've never been taught to that you could do better,
Exposed.
given the education to get into a college, to get into other better career opportunities that could give you a lift up, help you to buy things to establish your own self and your own wealth. And so that is, all those things are really a history of systemic racism, institutional racism in the United States. I think that's the reason why, when I'm, as a doctor, when I look around there, not very many other black doctors, very few black male doctors. That's because there aren't really role models for us to look up to when we're in school. When we're younger, we're not taught that we should try to become doctors, or we don't go to schools that give us the educational background we need to become doctors or to get into the colleges or med schools that we need. And again, a lot of that is based on institutional racism that's been in place for for decades or centuries. And then I think the other place I see racism sort of in real time is just in the work that we do and working and seeing patients that come into our clinic. The clinic that I serve, most of the patients are either Black or Latino. And the health problems we see in Black and Latino communities are because of these social determinants A lot of them are based in institutional racism. So if you don't have money, if you don't have school, if you don't have a good job, if you live in a house that's not taken good care of, if you have bad air in your community, all those things, if they happen, you're going to end up having bad health outcomes. You're less likely to have access to healthcare. And so that's the other place that I see the impact of racism is in the actual patients that come into the clinic that I work in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, Granddad.
Boy, it's sort of systemic racism. It's sort of like the air you breathe. I read this article about microplastics in the air that they even find in the national parks now. Shows you how polluted everything is, not just on the plastic in the US and more broadly. To try to change that narrative, I've been involved the last 2 to 3 months in a Saturday dialogue with people primarily from the African diaspora in the US, in the UK, in Belgium, Nigeria, South Africa, and even Nepal on economic empowerment. And the whole thing is about networking, having a focus on improving the economic opportunities for the African diaspora, focus on education, investment. So notwithstanding all the negatives, it makes me feel good to participate in this particular group, that people understand what the problems are, but are trying to use their individual assets and connections to create a better future for all. So even at my age, you can still reach out to others. In this particular group, one family has kids involved, and to listen to the 12 and 14 and 16-year-olds talk, you would think you were talking to somebody in their 30s or 40s with years of experience. But the parents raised them, one, to understand the value of education and to understand their own personal talents, and as grooming that to make good global citizens for the future. It lifts up the spirit to be involved in something like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good.
It's funny that I just wanted to share with you guys that a couple of days, probably 3 days ago, when I was working in the city, and I watched a young kid, a young black kid, come out of an alleyway and gun down a black kid. And the kid was a drug dealer. I've seen him on the block hustling, and but the kid came out the alley and just gunned him down. And I was just in the street working. I just witnessed the whole thing, and it was just absolute madness to witness it. And then once he gunned him down, ran in his pockets, and emptied his pockets out. And it was, and people, they screamed and they were staring, but they wasn't shocked. They wasn't horrified. I was horrified, but they wasn't. And that's the kind of thing that goes on, like I said, in Wilmington, on the east side of Wilmington, on a daily basis. And I always said with systemic racism, when I've talked to people on the internet about systemic racism, they always come back to me, especially my white friends will say, well, you guys need to sort out black on black crime. And we as a group, college kids and doctor and coaches, and we're successful people, and we're middle-class people. But that we do have an issue of black on black crime, which is when we talk about systemic racism, it is an issue but also we got to deal with and try to find ways to deal with this. A black kid, a black youth, in London, the same thing. A black youth will stab you. They don't use guns in England, but they'll stab you to death. And we have to, as a people, try to address this issue. I don't know what to do. It's Coach, I know you deal with kind of stuff like this, but it's sad that a black man, a black youth will take a black youth's life in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And that's something that we really need to address and really need to deal with. And guys like us got to get back in the communities. I don't know what we can do, man. This is something that's been going on since I don't know, since we've been in the Americas. But we definitely need to address. I think it's a big issue that we need to address.
In what you're saying, and I've dealt with it. I live in Wheatley Heights. Wheatley Heights and Wyandanch share the same zip code. Wyandanch there's shootings every other day, and it's literally a mile down the street from me. Wheatley Heights is the better side. But when I look at it and I look at what some of the reasons for the infighting amongst ourselves, yes, education plays a key. I look at our schools, and here on Long Island, where most of the schools, it doesn't matter if it's predominantly Black or not, you're dealing with all they see is white males and females in front of them. I'm in a school my elementary school has 862 students. I am the only Black male teacher in the building. And I'm the only one on the 5th grade, which is the last grade before they go. There are 6 classes. There are 5 female white teachers, and I am the only Black male teacher. I was transferred from another building for bringing this up because there was a lot of nepotism. There's a lot of hiring a friend of a friend who just happens to be white. And I'm saying you're not showing these kids another avenue. And, by the time they leave elementary school, a lot of them have been determined in their heads, their minds, that this is life. So you don't have a lot of Black male teachers. So for me, I see it in the classroom, and it points out to where you're not showing them successful stories or other avenues that they can go to. And when you have kids, 13, 14 years old walking with a gun and shooting someone else, there's no value there. There was never a value instilled in them that life means something. And I'm not saying that's the one main thing that can help, but if you don't expose them to it, if you don't show them or give them an avenue to say, hey, maybe I want to be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or anything that will lead them away from taking that negative turn, it's such a challenge. It's a huge challenge that we face within our own community. Again, I can't listen to music today. I can't listen to music, music in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. A lot of the music had a point. A lot of the music touched you in a certain way that you listened to the words. Before it started getting into the cursing and the nigger terms and the degrading of women, there was a point to music. To where now I think too many kids are exposed to music, and the music out today doesn't do us justice. It doesn't help our plight because kids look up to it as that's how life is. And it's a small percentage. And I just think we have to expose our community, but it's so much and there's so few. So it's a big challenge, and I agree with everything you're saying. It's disgusting to see it when it happens in your own community, and you're trying to figure out ways to solve it. But it's like you try one thing and you 10 steps back because one person who they may look up to, or that's the big person in town, totally wipes that clear because they're the person they see every day. They see them 12 out of the 24 hours. So it's a challenge.
Thank you.
Let me just mention something that happened here in Arlington today, this week. So in one neighborhood, one neighbor wrote on the sidewalk, the child did, with colored chalk, "Black Lives Matter." Another person, a neighbor, looked at that, didn't like it, and called the municipal services to come out and have it wiped off. And this is a overwhelmingly Democratic voting middle class county. And so even in the best dress, still racist to the core.
Yeah, 100%.
And on that note, do you guys have any like words of words of wisdom, or
You are.
like a quote that I guess I don't mean like a lighter tone, but something where like something that keeps you going, instead of something that, because like everything that we've been talking about, it's kind of like heavy and stuff, but is there something that you hear and you're like, I want people to see this, I want people to hear this, and like keep going? Like Spencer, like you were saying, like keep the pressure on, like that sort of energy.
Young lady, you better put a mister. You better put a mister on the front of that.
Mister.
But listen, I just want to say, man, this is awesome. This whole thing. And for me, it's you guys. You know, young lady and Slam. Sorry that I don't remember your name, but you guys, man, you the future. You know, our knees sore.
Yeah.
You know, our backs are bad. We don't got the energy running down the street and protest. But you guys give me hope. The simple fact that there's young people out here like you, my daughter, and other young people that are fighting this fight. It's a shame that we have to fight this fight in 2020, but to know that you guys are out here fighting this fight makes me feel so good and so proud, because you know it wasn't me who started this. It wasn't me who got Starbucks to change this or that statue to fall down. I had nothing to do with it. I was in the bedroom watching CNN. I had nothing to do with it. You young people are getting out there and y'all making changes, and that makes me so proud and feel so good. And right here, this forum that you guys had, this forum, and you getting this information out to the world, it's big, man. I mean, you guys are changing the world, and just keep doing what you're doing. Be proud of you. And like I said, like Dave Chappelle said, you know, we're gonna sit in the back seat and we're gonna enjoy the ride. And you guys are great drivers, so just keep doing what you're doing, and it's awesome. It's awesome.
Thank you.
I think again, if you want to think, I'm just trying to think of a word. I don't have a specific word, but I always go back to that comfort statement again, that the youth today can't settle. You can't accept, you know, it's not a way of life. Change it. You know, it was our way of life because there was not enough people listening. And now you have the world listening, and it's something that you should not settle on. You should push the fight. Again, I keep saying 2 months from now, because 2 months from now, for us up here, summer's over. We go back to school in September. Once school, if it does open up, it's kind of like people forget about everything because their way of life is back to their normal. Don't get comfortable with that. This is something that now you have people, you have celebrities and the businesses.
Oh no.
Did you lose the connection?
The Wi-Fi.
His Wi-Fi or your Wi-Fi? What?
I think it's his Wi-Fi. Okay, we're gonna put a pause on that. He comes back.
Donating money to the causes, make sure the money's being used for the right thing. All right, there we go. I kind of lost my train of thought, sorry. But my point is just that don't get comfortable, okay? I keep saying 2 months from now, keep fighting. You know, we're sort of like the standing guard behind you, where you walk down that dark alley and they're ready to attack, and then we're the shadow and they run. So be that front line, because standing behind you is the experience, the education, the people that are going to back you up. But you know, as Spencer, as you were saying, the youth, just know that you're the fight, and speak your mind and put it out there, and just hold people accountable, hold each other accountable. You know, that's one of the biggest things that we don't do. We don't hold each other accountable enough. You know, we'll say something today and tomorrow it's out the window. Hold each other accountable and stand up. But thank you. This is awesome. It's necessary. You know, there's so much trauma out there. You know, for the Black community, there's trauma, and I say trauma. I think of my own trauma. Robert, you talked about depression. I think of my own depression, and I have to admit it. And admitting it was the
Yeah,
thing.
it's hard.
Yes, it's like an alcoholic. You have to
Yeah.
admit it in order to grow. So there's so many things that run through my head that I'm so impressed with the youth. I think of my daughter out there going to protests, and my youngest, she's like asking the questions and pushing the issue, and just keep doing it. You know, I tell them all the time, you don't have to worry, because I'm better than what's his name from Taken. I will find them.
Yeah, I think the very fact that we're having this conversation, there's lots of other people having similar conversations, and the conversations are happening in places where everybody can see and hear them, which is so different than even 10 years ago. And so I think that's what really has the potential to make this momentum and this movement keep going and actually see change, because everyone knows who else is in the fight with them. 20 years ago, you wouldn't know. You could have had a protest in your neighborhood, but you wouldn't know if it was happening on the other side of the country at the same time. You wouldn't have CNN with
Yeah.
Yep.
screens of all of it happening at the same time. And that's sort of what drives us, is like, when you know that you're doing it and you're not alone, other people, it's going to keep you going, because you're all in it together. So I think if we can harness that and keep that going, hopefully this will last past 2 months and we can see
Yeah.
change. But the generation that's really fighting this fight right now, it's you guys have access and to things that there never were before. And so you just got to use them, and use social media, use video, use 24/7 media, use all those things to make change happen, because a movement of this size hasn't had those sort of resources and tools ever before. And I think that's what's already making the differences now. So hopefully, people keep taking advantage of that and really see the change that we need to see.
Granddad, you're the last one. You gotta hit it out the ballpark.
Okay. But first,
Bring us
I want
home.
to thank you, Kavehi, for thinking of this, connecting
Thanks,
with your
Lam.
friends to make it possible. This is a good use of your gap year, that even during a COVID quarantine, you looked into yourself, you found what was your passion, you saw a problem, and you committed yourself and got your circle together to try to make a difference. And then you saw yourself being part of something much larger. And as Raymond noted, that the technology that you have for reaching out and including people from across the country, couldn't have been done 10 years ago. So you have found in yourself something. You and Slam working together on this and building relationships that will make you feel more comfortable in challenging situations that you may be entering into a year or 2 years from now, to keep the change that you're creating now, to keep it living. The country needs to change. We're seeing it can be done. Just have to keep up the pressure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. We enjoyed having this conversation with you all, and you all shared a lot of really cool things that I don't think a lot of people ever thought about or noticed. So just to end it, Kavehi wants to share some of the things that have been productive, or the progress that we've seen in the last couple of weeks due to the protests.
Yeah, so my granddad, the CEO of Sending Article, sent me this article the other day, and the article contained a few things that, like, some updates, I guess, which Sam wanted me to share. Was Minneapolis voted to disband its police department. LA is redirecting up to 150 million from its police budget, which I think is at in the billions. I mean, hey, this is progress. We can take it for now, but keep putting the pressure. And they're shifting that towards social programs. Houston further restricted police use of force. New York State repealed a law keeping officers' disciplinary records confidential. So this is just the beginning. Like you guys had said before, like we're seeing like a lot of change in such like a short period of time. But these are like a few things that they're tangible things to show that like what we're doing is working, like the progress that we're making. It isn't fake, but it's like tangible things. But yeah. I just want to thank everyone again for participating and being a part of this.
Sure, thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Okay.
Make sure you tell your sons that you love them. I love you, boy. Good job.
Yes, sir.
Hey.
All day, every day.
All right,
Make
fellas.
sure you tell your dads you love them too.
That's good. Thank you, guys. It's awesome, man.
Thank you all.
Guys, happy
Okay.
Hey,
Hopefully
my people Jamaican too.
Okay, I'm gonna cut the live stream.